All right, we've gathered up our supplies. You should have your Dominicana fabric all ready to go. We have the yardage that we need, and now we get to the fun part, which is actually my favorite part of the quilting process, and that is the cutting. I know a lot of people dread cutting, but it really is so relaxing. I absolutely love it. So I'm going to show you how to cut out the center blocks and then also the strips. As you can see, because all 20 of these blocks that make up the Blox quilt are identical, you're going to be cutting out the exact same cuts for the center squares and for the strips. Everything measures the same, so it's going to be a very zen-like experience for you. You're cutting out the exact same pieces just out of the 16 different fabrics from my collection. So we're going to start off with what I'm calling block number 1. And it's probably too far for y'all to see, but this center fabric here is the plátanos or plantains. It's this print, and then the strips that border it are this kind of buttered colored geometric print that's made up of a bunch of different little triangles. All right, so if we look at these and we ask ourselves the contrast question, this one clearly plays as my light and this one as my dark. I have some good contrast going. That's the same thing that it looks like here. Let's put the rest of these fabrics aside and show you what you need to cut out of these two. Look how cute my little plátanos are. If you've ever had a green plantain, you know exactly what this is. All right, so we're going to cut out a square for this for the center block. Go ahead and grab the largest square ruler that you have, in my case 12.5 inches square, and let's start cutting. To start cutting the plantains fabric, first we'll have a look at the overall design of the Blox quilt, and you'll see that there's 4 blocks that feature the plantain fabric as the center. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. That means we need to cut out 4 squares to the same size, and I like to make my cuts as efficient as possible. So if I need 4 squares, I'm just going to go ahead and cut all 4 of them right now. Now the size of the finished block is 13 inches square, and the center square here that we need to cut out of this fabric is 10.25 inches by 10.25. So here is where my 12.5 inch square ruler comes in really handy. And I like to cut using 2 rulers, so I have my long strip ruler that reaches the full length of the fabric here, all right? I've taken my strip ruler and I cut a very, very small sliver off of the one side here to make sure that I have a nice straight edge. And of course the selvages are up here, so that means that my fabric is folded. Everything is nice and flat. So now I'm going to take my strip ruler. This is because I'm right-handed. I will take the strip ruler and set it to the left. With my bigger square ruler, I'm going to measure the 10.25 inches. That means I'm lining up this freshly cut edge on the 10.25 inch mark of my ruler. Right there. So from that edge to this edge of the ruler is exactly the 10.25 inches that I need to cut. Then I bump up my second ruler, and I like to slide my ruler up to make sure I can adjust every little bit. I want it to be right on the 10.25 inch line the entire way up and down this edge. And you might have to move it little by little, but that looks good. Then we'll slice it. When we remove that one, if you notice, after you remove this ruler, because we used it to measure, when I move the ruler out of the way, this is exactly the 10.25 inches that I need to cut. So if I have this ruler here as my straight line guide, I can cut there, and I know that it's perfect to size. So here's 10.25. Now, I'm going to turn this on its side, and remember it's doubled up, so we're cutting out 2 squares at a time. I have my selvage here, so I'm going to trim that off first because I don't want that in my project. And then we're going to take the same big ruler again, the square ruler. Try not to move your fabric, just keep it all as even as possible so we can cut through these 2 layers. This is a fresh cut edge where I removed the selvage, so I know that's straight. I know this is straight, so I can use those 2 clearly straight edges to measure. So now I'm going to lay my ruler so that the 10.25 inch mark is on this cut edge, and this edge is flush on the bottom. So now again I know that whatever is underneath the square is exactly the 10.25 inch square that I need. So I can cut here, and that's 2 squares, okay? And I'm going to repeat that here. 10.25. Nice and square, and cut here. So this is a little waste that we have, and you can use that later in something else to piece it into. But here are the 4 center squares that I need for the 4 different blocks in the Blox quilt that feature the plátano square. And to finish cutting out the pieces for that number 1 block, you'll see that the fabric that kind of frames out the little square of the plantain fabric is this yellow geometric print that we're going to be cutting out from here. Now if you notice, all the different strips in the patchwork are outlined in this design sheet, okay? So you'll see that you're cutting out 1, 2, 3, and 4 different strips. And if you notice, there's pairs of the sizes that you need. So these 2 parallel strips are the same size, and these 2 are the same size. So to cut these out, let's go over the dimensions so we can start cutting them. Now for cutting these out, there's 2 shorter strips than the longer ones. There's 2 that are short and 2 that are longer. The dimensions are going to be 2 1/8 inches by 10 1/4, and then 2 1/8 by 13 1/2. So we're going to first cut a nice little sliver off the end here so we can have a nice straight edge to start cutting our strips from. After you have that, you can even take a smaller ruler, or just, we'll use this one for the 2 1/8 inch measurement. Now, if you're not familiar with cutting 1/8 inch measurements, let me give you a close-up of the ruler so you know exactly where to line it up. So on most quilting rulers, you'll see these 1/8 inch increments. So if we're looking here between inch 1 and 2, you'll see that you see these little black tick marks. And every one up from an inch is going to be 1/8, because each inch increment is divided into eighths. So if we have inch number 1 here, this would be 1, right? From here to here is 1 inch. Then you have 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, and 8/8 is 8 over 8 in a fraction, right? Which is just 1. So that's the next 1 inch increment, which would take you to 2 inches. All right, does that make sense? So if something says 3/8, all you do is count 3 of the little 1/8 inch marks over. So if it said 1 3/8, you would just go to the 1 inch and then go 1, 2, 3/8, and you would line it up with that little mark there. In our case, we're cutting 2 1/8. So 1 inch, 2 inch, and just 1/8 inch over. It's literally just a little bit more than the 2 inches. So it's quite easy to measure, the same way that you would line it up with any other line on your rulers. All right, so I'm lining it up with 2 1/8 inch mark, and my apologies for the glare from the lights, but it's right there, 2 1/8, and I'm lining up the 2 1/8 inch mark and then bumping my second ruler over. I'm going to slide this down to make sure that I'm maintaining the 2 1/8 all the way up my strip. And you'll need 2 strips at the same 2 1/8 inch. Now from these 2 strips, first we're going to cut off our selvages, and then we're going to subcut them down to the size strips that we need. So they're already 2 1/8, and the other dimension on the other side needs to measure, let's see, 2 of them need to be cut to 10 1/4 inches. So because my strip is doubled up again, I can just line up the freshly cut edge on 10 1/4 and cut. Okay, so I have these 2. Remember, 2 of them are the same size and the other 2 are the same size. So this is 10 1/4. And then from the other strip, I'm going to cut 2 that measure 13 1/2. This is not quite long enough, so you can set that aside for another project. So now we need 13 1/2. This ruler is not quite big enough. So I'm going to use my longer strip ruler and line it up at the 13 1/2 inch mark from there to there, and I can cut here. And now you'll see that for the first block, okay, block number 1 in this quilt, here, we have everything that we need to piece it together. So let me show you how this is going to come together. You'll have the center square. You're going to attach to the shorter strips, the ones that measure, remember, 10 1/4. So it's going to be the same exact height as that center square. And you'll sew these to the sides. After you piece them together, okay, this is then going to measure 13 1/2 inches. And then this will be the same length as that. And you'll put these 2 here. And that's how you start making every single one of the squares for the Blox quilt. So Remember, same dimensions for every single block. Simply look at the design here and see which fabrics are being cut out of what, and go ahead and cut that out. So I'm gonna get busy cutting into all the fabric pieces, the 16 different prints, so I can get my 20 different center blocks cut out and all the coordinating strips. Because I have a specific design kind of orientation going on here, and the way that I've matched up specific prints with other fabrics, I like to set them all aside with the matching strips that are going to go with that coordinating square. So if you want to do that in a stack, or if you want to kind of lay out separate piles, go ahead and do that. Just something that will keep you somewhat organized. So after you cut out all your squares and strips, according to the combinations that I have here on the finished quilt design for you, you're going to head over to the sewing machine and you're going to sew these together. First, I like to start off with the two shorter strips, the ones that measure 10¼ inches. Remember, your square was cut to 10¼ inches square. So this should measure from the same as any of the sides of your square. Okay, so just pick two sides and we're going to attach these strips here. So I'm just going to lay one on top of the other. I find that this is still small enough that I don't need pins, but if you feel like you need some pins for stability, go ahead and do that. But I'm just going to use a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure my needle is threaded. And that's on one side, and I'll do the exact same size strip on the opposite side. So you're attaching two parallel strips first, and then we'll turn it and attach the two longer strips on the other sides. Okay? All right, so now we are ready to attach the remaining two strips. From here to here now should measure the 13½ inches. So you'll see that when you go to attach these strips on the top and the bottom, it should measure exactly the same length across. And there is your first finished square. Now, if you measure this, it should measure 13½ inches by 13½ inches, okay? You're going to repeat that to all of your square blocks and strip combinations according to the overall design. Go ahead and make all 20 of your blocks, and I will meet you back here in the next video of this video series to talk about some design placement and put it all together on the design wall.